Welcome to MSUA's The Pulse, where we speak with leaders from across the mobile, technology, and satellite industries about the future of connectivity, communications, and enterprise technology. I'm your host, Lisa Dreer. We're going to be busting some myths around disaster recovery and business continuity during The Pulse today. You know, the pundits of weather are saying that we're in for another year of severe storms and time is running out. So what is your disaster preparedness plan? In this episode of The Pulse, we'll be speaking with Tucker Morrison, who's the CEO of Blue Sky Network, and Jeff McFarland, who is a business continuity expert, the founder of Applied Satellite Engineering, and now part of Blue Sky Network. And together we'll be debunking some of the most common myths about satellite and satellite technology and talk a little bit about what steps you can be taking to be prepared for not only this year's crazy weather and other disasters that may get in the way of you having a great business continuity experience. So for when you talk about, business continuity and remote connectivity and even kind of reactive communications needs that there might be out there, there's some reluctance sometimes to use satellite connectivity. And some of the myths include things like satellite is just too darn expensive. The network service can be unreliable, or it's difficult to use. And also sometimes the devices and hardware don't work when you need it the most. So joining me today, like I mentioned, is Tucker Morrison and Jeff McFarland. So welcome to The Pulse, Jeff and Tucker.
Thank you for having us, Lisa. We're really great to be here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Lisa. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both for joining today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to be here and talk with us. So Tucker, maybe you can just start by giving us a little bit of background. Obviously, I threw out a few different things there, but we'll end up going into each of these myths one by one, but maybe you can just start with a little bit of background.
Sure. I think from a big picture standpoint, some of these myths have always been one of the biggest challenges for the adoption of satellite connectivity. First and foremost, it seems to always revolve around price, but quality of service and user experience, is really very important, not just at the consumer level, but at the business enterprise level. What we've always seen, and I think if we start with price, the per cost monthly fees were expensive, the equipment was expensive, and it was hard to use. Well, what we've seen now is that the costs per month for satellite service are similar to what your cell phone used to be. And I had an experience this weekend where I actually went to the cell phone store to deal with a broken phone. And I was surprised at how much my monthly bill was, but you still pay it each month. By and large, however, sat phone and data costs are now what those monthly bills for cellular used to be, 10 years ago.
Yeah. How about you, Jeff? What's kind of your perspective?
Well, I just think from an end user perspective, it seems very complicated to think about satellites and the technologies and the changing technologies and what we keep hearing with new satellites. So it can be overwhelming for people to select a solution if they don't have an engineering team in-house or somebody dedicated to do that. So I think that's kind of led to some of the myths and misunderstandings about satellite.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump into it. So the first myth I think we want to look at is satellite is too expensive. So what do you say, Tucker?
Well, as I mentioned, I was talking about the monthly fees. Right now, satellite fees per month can be between $50 and $500 a month, depending on how much data and usage you have. That's really not too different from what our mobile phone bills are, or even can still be today. It's not the multiple thousands of dollars per month. Plans and technology have evolved where it's just a lot more affordable. And you think from a business enterprise standpoint, protecting your operations and protecting your people, that's a small price to pay to make sure that the operation is unaffected in the event of day-to-day ops or a disaster and being prepared for a disaster.
When you talk about, this $50 to $500 per month, are you talking about an enterprise solution or, Joe working out of his house kind of solution?
Really, it can even be an enterprise solution. I mean, a lot of the bulk of our customers, we really have a really small kind of consumer business, but it's really all, small, medium businesses and even some large enterprises. But the per plan cost ranges in that kind of, $100 to $200 per month range. And secondly, the equipment prices have also come down. And so, something that used to be thousands and thousands of dollars, and across, a big install is much more affordable now. And I think that, with technology, we've seen just an overall greater adoption. People are now realizing that the need for connectivity in remote areas is very important. And so, by and large, their businesses can be more effective. And that small spend really, pays back a lot, whether it's, again, worker safety, business safety and operations, or just not even having to send people out into the field. You can now remotely monitor and manage your equipment with newer technology that's available.
Right. So we're talking about, disaster preparedness today. Jeff, what's your perspective in terms of, satellite being too expensive as it relates to, business continuity and disaster preparedness plans?
Yeah, to kind of further the point, but that both of you were kind of chatting through, when you look at these plans, there's different stages of preparedness that you need to be thinking about. There's, when we talk about what plan do you need for your business, what size is your business, you have this immediate need. The disaster hit, I need to get help, I need to call my boss, I need to call the owner, right? We need to let people know a disaster is happening. Then you have the first 24 hours. How are you going to survive? How do we get hold of the experts? Do I need to get, PR? Do I need to get chemical engineers? Do I need to get a bomb expert? Who do we need to have in here as you're meeting with your top staff? So those are very intense, very focused needs that that you need to think about, that we found that people are needing to spend some time thinking about. Those might be a different solution than getting the small office up and doing email and doing web surfing, right? Those are different requirements. There's also going to be some scaling of how you can bring your company back to recovery. So those are things that people need to think about, and there's different plans. Some of the voice only plans are going to be the lower cost, and we see small businesses, very small businesses, 1, 2, 3 type people, finding a need to have just a voice solution for that immediate emergency.
Great. Okay, that's good to know that you can kind of have those different types of services depending on what your needs really are. So let's jump into myth number 2, and that's talking about that the satellite services can be unreliable. So is that really the case, Tucker?
Well, I think it used to be. Today, we really don't see that as much of a fact any longer. I mean, there's a number of constellations that are very, very reliable. And so the myth itself should be debunked. What people really care about is making sure that their connectivity option works, when they need it to. And whether it's, a lot of LEO satellite constellations that can mitigate some rain effects, or we've got cross-link satellites that cover the entire Earth. All of that now gives a greater sense of security and reliability for the service itself. Secondly, again, back to technological developments, the antenna technology has improved. 2 decades ago, we saw satellites at a 4 or 5 foot diameter. Now we're seeing terminals that have an antenna that's the size of your fist. And so there's a big spectrum of, what the right solution is for your enterprise. But what it's saying is now you can hook it up to a car, to a boat, to a pole. Is it a big building install? And all of that relates to how much data do you need? Because this whole being prepared and business continuity solution goes beyond just telephony. It's about data and communicating. As Jeff said, before the emergency happened, once you're into it, and then how do you react in the first 24 to 48 hours post a business interruption.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jeff, how would you say things have changed over the last, I don't know, 20 years?
Yeah, no, we've seen tremendous changes and advances in technology. Most of these satellites are now on their or there are several satellite constellations that are now on their second generation. We're finding their effectiveness in different conditions based on the different technologies. Rain fade is an issue with some bands, not an issue with other bands, right? So you don't have to have rain and weather be a driving factor anymore. You can, with the LEO constellations, you can be mobile, omnidirectional antennas, so you don't have to point at a stationary point. So there's just lots of new technologies and new ways that we're finding the satellites are very reliable and very successful for people. It also depends on your locations. So once again, with satellites that move, the LEO constellations, you actually have full global coverage. It's going to operate the same everywhere around the globe.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
but there's one other point I did want to make too. And it's not only the technology that's advanced, it's also our understanding of how to implement the technology and work with the technology. So industry, through some of these disasters, through the 20 years of lessons learned, have learned how to use the technology in its best forms as well.
That's right.
Great. That's a really good point. And actually, I think we might talk about that on our next myth a little bit more even. And our next myth is that satellite is just difficult to use. So Tucker, what do you think?
Again, I have to say that's a myth that needs to be debunked. There's a couple ways to think about it. It's like, what do we mean by to use, and what's the form factor? There's the setup to me, and then there's the maintenance. And I think, on point one with the setup, you no longer need to be, an IT network configurator to make this thing work. At the retail level, the consumer level, the phones out of the box are a lot more user-friendly than they used to be. The terminals out of the box for, more of an enterprise solution or mobility solution that might go on a truck or a boat or an airplane, outside of an airplane, because there's some install pieces there. But those can now be set up and configured in a much more user-friendly way. You don't have to be a technological subject matter expert and configurator. I liken it to, if you can set up a router at your house, you should be pretty good. And actually might be simpler than setting up a new phone, from the Apple store. But the second piece is really maintaining the use of these. And that has always been, a bit more of a challenge too, because if equipment goes down, now you might need to have a little bit more expertise. But with, kind of the adoption of cloud-based services, this too has become a lot easier from a user experience standpoint. You can go back and you can configure things remotely. You don't have to go out into the field and work on the equipment to make sure it's functioning properly. You can have alerts that something is working or isn't working. And that way, now you can sit there and configure it via the cloud. It can send a message to the terminal. It's acting right or acting wrong. And then if you need to send someone out there to swap it out, you're making a much more informed decision rather than just spending a lot of time and effort, without, great knowledge. And so
that's great.
That part's a lot easier.
Yeah. So you're telling me that I don't need to understand azimuth and look angles and know what satellite I'm trying to connect to and where it is in the sky?
I'm telling you that there is some still pointing and install features, but from personal experience, 25 years ago, I used to set up the satellite dish to try and get DirecTV. It is much simpler than that.
That's great news. So Jeff, what are your perspectives on this, especially when you're talking about, an emergency response situation where you might be out in the field and setting something up on the run, or maybe even doing it on the move?
Absolutely, yeah. And that scenario is very valid, where you're on site, you need to get set up quickly, and that happens relatively easy anymore. Where we see the bigger problem is when it's just become routine and we haven't had an emergency in 6 months, and how do we keep the equipment up? on an oil rig, for example, if an oil rig has an issue, goes down, the technician is on a flight. I mean, within hours, and typically they're going to land in a New Orleans area, and they're in a hotel room. If they can fix this problem sometime between when they got to that flight, out of the hotel room, before they got on that helicopter to the derrick, they're going to save tremendous amount of money and effort and trouble. So, and that's kind of a use case we've seen for a long time. Not necessarily a natural disaster, but an emergency where you need to be solving a problem remotely and on your feet. So Tucker's point about maintenance and monitoring is very valid. When things are really far away, and so many of us have offices now, even small companies have offices spread all over the place, including all over the globe. For the equipment to behave the same, you can manage it from your headquarters. You can know that it's operational from your headquarters. It's just a tremendous feature for this remote communication.
That's great. It's really exciting that, how far the technology has come, and I'm so happy that we're here kind of talking through some of these things that I think are just commonly held myths by a lot of folks that maybe aren't in the industry and are really in need of making sure that they have a disaster preparedness plan that allows their team to communicate when, where, and how they need to, despite what's happening in the local area.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into myth number 4, and that is that that the hardware doesn't always work when you need it to. So Tucker, why don't you take us through this one?
Well, I fortunately, I haven't had an experience where we've needed it and it didn't work. Although earlier this year, I think on our first MSUA call, we did it and Texas was without power. I certainly could have used some connectivity because I think we were on and off with rolling blackouts. But, one of the things that we're doing is setting up a monitoring service. And it's really for the use of the customer, to that point that Jeff just hit on. When someone goes out to use it and the disaster is already upon them, now the equipment doesn't work. And you don't know if it's the satellite service that isn't working or your equipment. And so, there are ways now for us to send a message to the device and it reports back, "Hi, I'm here, I'm fine," once a month. And then we can send a report to the network administrator, whether it's one person or a team of people, to understand that all of your devices are functioning properly, or that they have or have not had an active call in 30 days. And so you can now look for exceedances, and we create you can create a user interface, like a heat map, depending on how many devices you have, that have a little matrix. And so you just look for the ones that have, that seem to be inoperative, or they haven't had any activity. And now you can then, dig down into the menu a little bit to find out what's going on. Was it because there wasn't a need for activity, or is the machine, not actually functioning properly? And so that's something that I think is much more easy to do today than we did kind of 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Sure. So Jeff, maybe you can tell us a little bit about some real world examples.
So yeah, absolutely. We started becoming involved with this company back when the 3 hurricanes, 2004, 2005 time period, hit, Charlie, Katrina, and then Rita. And that's kind of when we first became involved with remote communication. Some of the things that were going on is, in the different hurricanes, the hospitals weren't able to relocate patients. Equally as critical is they weren't able to contact their delivery people. So I need more oxygen. I can't get hold of anybody with oxygen. Those are real life and death situations. But it went further. People who were managing hotels, all of a sudden they had a full hotel, disasters hit, and you got a front desk clerk playing triage this entire group of 150 guests, and it just kind of continued on in those type of areas. Utility companies have always been involved with remote communication. Typically, as I think most of us know that when to bring the power back up to the city, you have to start generator A, and then you have to drive 2 hours to generator B and get that one started in C. They're sequential. So having remote communication allows these guys to work, get A up and going, call B, get them going up without the 2-hour drive much quicker. So they've always been big proponents of satellite communication and kind of helped lead the way in some of these use cases into the other industries, or the other areas. So by the time we made it to Hurricane Irma, I think was the latest one to hit Puerto Rico, a lot of people were very familiar at this point with satellite usage, and they were doing pre-testing. They were making sure their equipment worked before the disaster hit, and they were understanding the key to satellite usage. There is one issue with the satellite usage that people don't understand, and I think it does show up in the reliability, and that is you have to be outdoors with line of sight to the satellites. Now, you don't really have to be outdoors if you have an antenna mounted on your building. So you have to have way, and there's ways to use satellite indoors. It's actually the primary usage is using it indoors, but you do have to understand that, have the equipment set up and ready to work for you indoors.
And I'd just add to Jeff's point, I mean, that goes back to that worker safety, right? We see the people on the news, they're always outside with the, with the sideways rain coming, and they're holding their mic, or they're communicating with a sat phone. But as Jeff just talked about, you can have the antenna up on the roof, out in the element, so to speak, but down below in the building, you can be at your desk working normally, communicating via telephony, or, sending data across, and, be in a much safer environment and a lot more effective as well.
Sure. Okay, so now that we've sort of debunked the most commonly held myths, as a user, right? So whether I'm a, disaster response team, I'm, I'm running a hotel, or I'm out on an oil platform, or, right? So all of these use cases we've talked about. How do I get started on developing my disaster preparedness plan and business continuity plan? What do I do? Where do I start?
Yeah, and it could be really simple. Larger companies tend to have staffs that are preparing this, but smaller companies, as you say, and on, we had an example of a Subway owner who had 5 Subways, and he had no idea in one of these hurricanes if his staff or businesses were still okay and what he needed to do the next day. So that was a good example. But it actually can be pretty simple. Just put together an emergency preparedness plan and make it part of the daily operations or the monthly operations. In other words, locate the equipment where it's visible to people. Let everybody in a company have a chance to test it, operate it. And you can do this with just a simple, make the test call once a month, twice a month. Make a test call once a month, twice a month. People can call whoever they need to call just to see that they know how to use the equipment, know where it's located, make sure the batteries are charged, and then have this understanding of how it's going to work. How is it going to work, right? Okay, I need to use it in this mode with the antenna on the rooftop, or if my building's coming down, I need to grab this thing and run into the parking lot and make the call that way. And so the other advantage of making the twice a month calls is it allows us to be helping track and monitor and automate some of this for upper management. So we could actually be keeping you informed if each of your Subway franchises is doing their testing every month. And it can be a fairly simple thing for you to implement as your business.
That's great advice. Tucker, any thoughts on how to begin? How do you get started?
So I think one of the best things, and it's really kind of playing off what Jet said, it's creating a checklist and utilizing that checklist. I mean, pilots use checklists, emergency responders use checklists. Sometimes we get a little bit ahead of ourselves when we think that we know how to use all the equipment in our operation. But to Jeff's point, having everyone be familiar with how to use this, that goes back to debunking some of the myths. They're not so hard to use if you just take the time to learn and then you practice proficiency. So, how do we get started? What you do is you lay out a plan, what's best for your organization. I think finding the right technology, the right scope, and you can work with some experts on that. to kind of determine what you need and what operational environment would be best for you. And then ultimately, I go back to what Jeff said, you have to practice it. You know, if you just let things sit idly by, the user experience will be bad. And more importantly, kind of people safety ultimately can be compromised if you're not prepared. You mentioned at the beginning of today's session, we're already starting to see some active storm seasons. One's bearing down kind of towards Florida, you know, as we speak. And we're seeing extreme heat waves on the West Coast. We had an active fire season last year. It's already talking about seeing an active fire season, an above average fire season this year. And, you know, a lot of people have been chomping at the bit to get outdoors for the last year. You know, last year we actually didn't have a lot of kind of, you know, human started fires. Well, we're going to have more people outside camping this year. Extreme weather events are going to be out there. You know, it's not just the people that are kind of recreationally out there. It's the folks that have to go, you know, support and connect in the event of an emergency. And so it's really an important part of our business. And we think it should be an important part of everybody's business as well.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you both so much for being here today. I want to give our audience a chance to ask some questions of our experts today. So let's head on over to questions and see what we have out there. And we did have a few questions that came in during our session. So let me grab the first one here, and that is, for hospitality, what are some of the examples of easy to use technologies that my staff can use in the event of an emergency? So Tucker, do you want to give that a shot?
Sure. I think that some of the easy to use technologies are comm centers that essentially allow you to have a, you know, what we call a plain old telephone system attached to your operation with an antenna up on the roof. That way, you know, we look at many different hospitality businesses, both being a, you know, communications gathering spot during a disaster, but also a bit of a safe harbor for visitors to and from, because that, you know, if you think of a hotel, it's probably better infrastructure than maybe some of the houses where people are around in nearby areas. And so if you can have a regular business center in the safety and security of your building without having to be outside, that's a great starting place. And it allows you to, you know, conduct normal business activities.
Got it. Any color to add to that, Jeff, at all?
No, I think Tucker summed it up. We often see the hotels will place a red phone in the security office, which tends to be down on, you know, first floor, ground level, often by the, you know, by the lobby or back behind. So it's kind of a dedicated, hey, use the red phone, and then the satellite back end pieces are usually behind that, and then up on the rooftop with the antenna.
Got it. Okay. Another question came in, and it is, what are the key benefits of LEO satellite networks versus GEO? And we might want to take a minute just to define each of those. So Jeff, any thoughts on that perspectives on that?
Yeah, LEO satellites tend to have some advantages. They're the more recent technologies, meaning the past 20 years plus, but a LEO satellite is nearer to the Earth. The GEO satellites are further away, so that delay, that you know, infamous satellite 2-second delay, isn't there with the LEO satellites anymore because it's physically closer. The LEO satellites travel around the globe, whereas the GEOs are stationary with respect to your place on the globe. So and so that's an advantage for moving items, objects. So people tend to lean toward LEO satellites if they're going to be in a moving situation, on a vehicle, boat, airplane. And we have omnidirectional antennas for that case, meaning you don't have to point them. The GEO satellites were the first satellite networks and historically had higher bandwidth solutions.
Got it.
And so that would be an advantage to using the GEOs if you're looking for the higher bandwidth. broadcasting, video for your network, et cetera. Although we are seeing the LEO networks have higher and higher bandwidth solutions now as well.
Understood. So when you look at the LEO constellations, I know that, we're seeing new satellites go up like every day, every week, all of the time. Are those networks, is there enough LEO satellites right now to really provide that reliable connectivity, or do you have to maybe consider a hybrid solution where you're using multiple networks? I don't know. Tucker, any thoughts there?
So it's kind of a big question. Are there enough LEO satellites to accommodate everyone? Probably not yet. But as you pointed out, they are going, different constellations are going up, near weekly, right? I think that there is still a large opportunity to bring broadband connectivity to most of the world that is in remote areas that doesn't have great infrastructure. And so as of right now, no, there aren't enough yet. And that kind of future technology is coming. And I think that will bring greater connectivity to those remote areas. The second part of it is that there's different applications for each of these LEO satellites, whether it's the full broadband, if you're just trying to do data at faster speeds, different areas of the earth that might be better for you. And so that's also coming online too. Some of the newer ones that are promised, I think, it's still early in the game. So we'll see how many of those really kind of are still here 5 or 10 years. But, in certain places or certain areas, like Starlink being one, Elon Musk is making great strides. And, while not offered in Mexico yet, it will be one day. And it's, there's really some exciting solutions that are being proposed and coming online.
Great. One of the questions that just came in is, can you tell us more about dual mode technology?
I'll be glad to speak to that. Dual mode technology really is kind of merging of technologies. So when we say dual mode, we typically mean 2 different networks, and we typically mean cellular network and satellite network. The cellular network continues to cover more and more of the globe where we are as people, right? So it continues to cover where the people are. And oftentimes that is higher speeds and less expensive. So there's advantages to using that technology. The satellite technology is a tremendous failover when you don't have the cellular service available. So that's why people are talking about dual mode. What we're trying to do with the satellite in the satellite space is make it so that you can do your daily operations can behave the same, and then we'll let the equipment decide which network it's using. And so that's kind of where we see those technologies going with dual mode.
Is there anything specific you need to have in place in order to be able to use that dual mode?
Well, your device would have to support it. Your device has to support it. And that's where it becomes kind of complicated for the cellular service. In the United States, less complicated than in Europe and other places in the world. But oftentimes there's a cellular service changes as you go from country to country or region to region. Satellite remains constant all over the globe. So there's a nice consistency to the satellite side of dual mode. When you're with the cellular side of your device, you have to be sure that you've set up service plans to support the different countries that you might be traveling through.
Yeah. Okay. So more for on the move types of applications in that case, probably, right? Whereas when you have fixed office locations or store locations, what have you, some of those use cases that you spoke about earlier, maybe that wouldn't be as necessary. Is that an accurate assessment?
I think we're kind of seeing a constant use for dual mode even in those situations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, as you might be able to take advantage of the higher bandwidth operations during your standard operations of your business. And it's only when the land grid has gone down due to some emergency that you need to fall over to the satellite. So it's just, I think it's just that trying to keep the business operations as consistent as possible is
Great.
often the goal there.
Okay. Let me see what else has come in here. Let's see. So one question is, as a satellite user, how can I learn more about the available solutions and I guess get smarter about those solutions, especially the new technologies?
So yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of suggestions. Shameless plug, but you could join MSUA, and we've got a number of resources available. But really, there's a lot being discussed about Internet of Things adoption, and there's white papers, there's resources about learning about how you can, what edge computing and connectivity needs will be in the future. And I think, as Jeff talked about, the cellular networks are rapidly covering the globe, but the satellite networks are being launched too. And you can really find out what the best solution is for you and your business, as well as, where you'll be operating, because that plays a big piece into, the right type of solution. If you're, in really, really remote regions of the world, satellite is maybe a more primary driver. If you're in areas that you're moving fast, whether it be over air, land, or sea, but you're going to be losing that cellular connectivity, you need a satellite backup with, as low latency as possible and immediate failover. So it's just a wealth of resources that can help you decide what's best for your business and how to be best prepared.
Great. Thank you, Tucker. Well, I don't see any other questions right now. Is there anything that we didn't hit on that we should talk about before we close, or any closing thoughts from either of you?
I think we've covered it, but Jeff might have some final thoughts.
No, satellites are super. Remote communication, satellite use has been a very exciting place to be over the past 20 years. And we only see it ramping up and getting more exciting and more interesting, more available, more user-friendly, more reliable. So I think it looks very, very bright for what we're going to be doing in this field.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both so much for being here to explore the satellite communications, especially as an integral part of a solid business continuity plan and disaster preparedness plan. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sure, it's our pleasure. And I want to take a moment to thank the Mobile Satellite Users Association, the MSUA, for hosting the Pulse. And if you're interested in learning more about MSUA, how to become a member, how to get our weekly newsletter where you can learn all kinds of things about what's happening in the satellite industry, what new technologies are coming out, how to build your disaster preparedness plan, for example, definitely head out to msua.org and sign up for our newsletter. And also watch for upcoming sessions on 5G broadband and many other topics that are coming up on the Pulse. Again, visit msua.org to learn more and see our upcoming sessions. And we'll see you next time on the Pulse.